Welcome everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. I know there are a few joining from overseas as well, especially our presenters, Gabi Münster from Germany, and we have Isabelle Van Campenhoudt from Belgium. And we also have Samudra, who is from over here in Sri Lanka. So today's meetup is a very special one, a special meetup for the International Women's Day, which falls in March. With that, let's take a look at the agenda. So we have two featured sessions today, unlike the other days where we had just one. So the first one will be by Gabi. She'll be talking about advanced Power BI modeling. And then we'll move on to Isabelle, who will talk about Power BI and Power Automate better together. And finally, we have Samudra, who will be talking about her favorite new feature in the new Power BI Desktop February 2021. She'll be talking about analyzing Parquet files using Power BI Desktop. All right, so moving on to the first session, we have Gabi Münster from Germany. She is a BI consultant at OH22 Data AG. She's also a Microsoft MVP. So it's really, we are really glad to have Gabi, Isabelle, and Samudra on this meetup. Yep, so let's get started. Gabi, you can take over the screen.
Okay, cool. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me, and thanks for making this possible. I'm grateful for the opportunity to have an event. I'm always happy to have events with all the other speakers, but now we have two other amazing female speakers, which I already have the pleasure to know before, and that is a real pleasure for me to have that opportunity. Thanks for Isabelle for joining us, and Samudra, I have to say, I had the honor to be her mentor at the New Stars of Data last year. She probably will talk about that. So it's a real great opportunity. Thanks so much. But now actually coming to the topic, something about the content. So I would like to introduce a few topics about advanced modeling opportunities in Power BI to you. So we already talked about myself. What you would need to know about data modeling in Power BI, I would start with some basics just to give you some rough ideas about general concepts that should be followed in Power BI, a little bit about the opportunities or the possibilities that you have there, which actually will allow you to shape the data and to actually do the modeling. And then I actually want to jump into the advanced modeling features, and there we also will have some demos. Let's try and see how far we get there. Last time I didn't manage to show everything, but I shortened it a bit, so hopefully we will cover most of the topics. The basics about data modeling. So why actually do you need a data model? Why don't you just connect to the data? And that's something, a discussion which I as a consultant have quite recently with customers, especially coming from the business areas and company who see the immense value of Power BI as a self-service reporting tool. But if they connect, for example, to line of business tools like ERP or CRM tools, they quite often get to the situation that they want to present some reports, but the data models of those applications actually are not really fitted or useful for data modeling on top. So what are the reasons to set up a proper data model first? First of all, it's easier to make to understand for the actual report developers. If you have a meaningful, a simple, and intuitively understandable data model, everybody who wants to create a report on top will have it easier to find the content they actually want to refer to. If you're looking at some of the line of business applications in the background, they have a lot of technical names. They have up to third normal form of a database development. That's something which really is hard to follow if you want to create reports on top. In addition, an easily understandable model is easier to maintain and easier to enhance, and it can even improve the performance as well as the performance of the load processes, and that is actually more important for the reporting, the performance of the queries run against this data model. There is three general concepts how to set up a data model for reporting tools. The first is a flat or denormalized table. That is actually one large table where you have everything, all the attributes inside, and you're just connecting to this one. The other extreme is a snowflake schema that is a little bit more going into the normalized database technology, more into the line of business parts, where you try to avoid data redundancy and where, for example, if you have a good example is the address dimension. An address is part of the customer, or you have a customer with addresses, you have sales reps with addresses, you have legal entities with addresses. And in a snowflake scheme, you would have one address entity, and that would be related to the customer, to the vendor, to the sales rep, to the legal entity, whatever, and not directly to the transactional data. So you sometimes would have several hops to get from an entity you won't actually use for filtering or slicing on until you actually reach the transactional data. And the star schema is something in between. It simplifies the snowflake schema because in that context, the address would be included into the customer, vendor, or sales rep entity. So you would, in the best way, only have one hop between your dimension, your actual context entity, and your transactional data, but still you would split up the model in smaller chunks than you would have with a flat or denormalized table. So it makes it easier for the engine to actually perform calculations, and it would also be easier for you to find your way around because you wouldn't have one large table containing all the attributes. And the star schema is actually the most recommended version of creating data models. I just pointed out some of the advantages and disadvantages of the different loads. And as I already mentioned, star schema is actually the model version that is the easiest to be read by human as well as by the engine. It, in most of the cases, creates the best performance, and it also is easily to extend and easily to enhance. I will share the slides afterwards, so I don't want to go into too many details here. Data modeling, as I mentioned, is something which happens in several steps in Power BI. And just a quick overview, which steps do you actually have? You have the data source itself. So that is where you get the data from. That could be an Excel file, it could be an ERP system, it could be a web application or even a website. You have the possibility to actually shape your data using Power Query. We will have a quick look into this later on. This is like the classical ETL process that you had in your data warehouse systems in the previous times as well. But this is like a kind of self-service ETL approach. And you have the actual data model in your Power BI model or later on in the Power BI service. And those are actually the three steps where you can shape your data. And this could be a small overview on where you could do what. So the more granular and the more related to the data source your transformations, your adjustments actually are done, the earlier in the whole process you should get started with this. So everything which you can prepare in your data source, you should prepare in your data source. That's the best way to keep the logic for a data source. If you have the decision that you cannot perform a transformation in the data source, either because the data source doesn't support this kind of transformation, or you need to perform transformation based on a combination of different data sources. In most of the cases, the recommendation is to perform it in Power Query, wherever that's possible. But there are some cases where the transformation in DAX in the actual data model are easier. That is especially if you want to perform something like lookups, get information into a table that is actually condensing or aggregating data from other tables. And that is something where DAX actually really shines and where it's easier to do that. But again, everything you can do as a preparation and you can persist is something which will help reducing performance issues later on. And the final thing is the actual business logic, the calculation rules, and that is done in DAX, in the data model, in the way of defining measures. Those about basic concepts. I already mentioned Power Query. So Power Query is a kind of self-service ETL approach, but Power Query is not something which is Power BI only. So Power Query is the name of the feature or the technology itself, and it applies the formula language M, which actually allows you to define your transformation steps, to actually describe step by step in sequential transaction steps what you want to do. And M is really useful and really intuitively applied by a lot of users because you have a lot of possibilities to actually walk through. You can click on each and every applied step and see the intermediary result after the step. You can actually exchange the order of steps if you see that probably the step of the renaming should be done before another one. You can break the whole code by this, but on the other hand, it allows you a lot of flexibility. You can delete steps later on and so on. So you have the possibility to use Power Query with the full front end to actually do this, or you have the possibility to look into the advanced view and edit the script by yourself. And as I mentioned, it's not Power BI only. So in Power BI, it's available in Power BI Desktop to actually create and prepare your data model in Power BI Desktop, or you can use Power BI data flows, which really is a kind of self-service ETL flows you can design. But it's also integrated in Excel, analysis services, Power Automate, common data services, and so on. So Power Query is actually something like a Microsoft standard tool, which actually is applied in different terms. Even if you want to include the results from this in other tools like Azure Data Factory or SQL Server integration services, to include results from Power Query steps that you define during your Power BI modeling experiences, even those standard loading tools, those IT department tools, support the applicants of Power Query scripts. And yeah, there's a lot of connectors already available to different data sources that you can use and that support a lot of cool features like query folding, which would mean that it translates into the language the data source actually uses by trying to translate as many steps as possible into this data source language and pushing it down so that the actual traffic is done on the data source instead on Power Query. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of connectors already available. Power BI actually supports most of those connectors. But on top, if a connector is missing, you have the possibility, as this is an open API, to implement your own custom connectors if you're lacking something. The next step would be the actual business logic that will be done in DAX. So DAX stands for Data Analysis Expressions, and it's rather similar from the terminology and from the structure to the Excel functional language that you're using there. And with DAX, you can do a lot of things. You can actually shape your data in the data model. So you can add additional information in terms of additional columns, for example, or you can create measures that actually contain the logic how your transactional data is actually be treated, is aggregated up, is filtered, and so on. And in contrast to how it was treated in the analysis services multidimensional part by using MDX, DAX is more, from a functional perspective, closer to T-SQL, to how you would treat this in the relational world. So you're actually working with tables, columns, and with relationships between tables, and you're working on those tables by defining which columns, which tables to actually choose, and you can work on the relationships between the tables. And that is something which is really useful by DAX because, as I mentioned, you have the possibility to create your own calculations and persist them in terms of calculated columns and tables. You can define measures that contain the business logic, the calculation rules, and you can work with these relationships. And here we are at a very important step in the modeling concepts, setting or getting the relationships right and proper is actually something which is really essential to have a good and working data model and to keep up the performance. But DAX is even allowing you to work on relationships that you don't have in the first place, or if you have several relationships which are not active at that point in time. So, for example, if you're thinking about a classical ERP system, you have a sales order with an order date, a shipping date, a due date, and you have a date dimension, then Power BI allows only one active relationship between your fact table, your ERP sales table, and your date dimension. So, for example, if your standard date to analyze would be the order date, then you would create an active relationship between the order date in the fact table and the date dimension, and two inactive relationships between the other two dates and the date table. And DAX allows you inside calculations to actually activate, to regard a relationship as active and work on those inactive relationships. And even more, it allows you to create virtual relationships inside your calculations. So you can actually define relationships between runtimes between tables at runtime, which allows you to create really efficient and really meaningful and complex calculations, even though those wouldn't be possible in the first place because of limitations in the data model. So that is actually the real power behind the data modeling there. So those are some topics about modeling in Power BI in general, and some of them we will see in the demos as well. But that is something which you can do in Power BI since the beginning. For sure, you have new DAX functions over the time. For sure, some of the relationships changed over the time, or the way how this analysis services tabular model, which is the actual technology behind the Power BI data models, evolved over time. But there are some things in Power BI that are really cool and that allow you to go over those borders, those limitations that you had in the first place, and to really allow you to step one step further and to actually enhance the value and the functionality of your data models. And I was mentioning that the Power BI data models are actually, from a technological perspective, analysis services tabular models. And that is something which is really interesting to know, because in this success story of Power BI, relationships and also, let's say, the responsibilities shifted a bit. So analysis services was more or less moved out of the data platform responsibility into the business applications, or even to be more concrete, into the Power Platform community and Power Platform responsibility. And Power BI became a superset for analysis services, or at least for Azure analysis services. Maybe that is something which is not 100% clear, but the announcement was actually that Power BI was to become a superset for analysis services. What does this mean? Both are based on the same principle, but they have different code paths. So they differ a little bit in terms of what is possible and what is not. And during the last 2 years, the Power BI team worked very intensely on closing the gap so that Power BI nowadays is able to cover almost all the topics that analysis services standalone can cover. But the interesting part is that new features for analysis services tabular are shipped to Power BI first, and sometimes to Power BI only. So there might be, and that is something which we will see in the overview just right now, there are some things which will be available in Power BI, but not in analysis services standalone. And that is, I try to make transparent by actually pointing those symbols next to those topics. So the features I would like to quickly introduce you to as parts of the advanced modeling are incremental refresh partitioning. That is something which was available in analysis services tabular for ages. in a very light version from the beginning, but in a really highly useful and effective version since Analysis Services 2016. And that is available in Power BI as well for quite a time in a limited fashion over the front end. But since the opening of the so-called XMLA endpoints, which are, let's say, the API endpoints that allow you to actually interact with the Analysis Services tabular models on the servers using scripting languages like the so-called XMLA or the TSML, the tabular model TMSL, tabular model scripting language. Those endpoints allow you to even define the incremental refresh, the partitioning in the same way that you would do it in Analysis Services tabular standalone. Another interesting feature, which was available in tabular also for quite a long time, but which is now available in Power BI as well, are the so-called large data sets. So if you're working with the Power BI service, you're probably familiar with the limitations that you have for data sets there. So a data set in the standard Power BI service using a Power BI Pro license is limited to 1 terabyte of data size. In the Power BI Premium standard, it's limited, sorry, not terabyte, gigabyte. I'm sorry, that was a bit too large. In the Power BI Premium, you're allowed to upload data models up to 12 gigabyte of data size. But the large data sets as part of Power BI Premium allow you to configure this on your server and to go to way larger models up to the actual capacity of the premium capacity you're on. Calculation groups is one of the most exciting features that actually came up for Analysis Services tabular, and that is the last of the features we want to look into that is also available in Analysis Services standalone. And that is something which, if you're familiar with Analysis Services multidimensional, again, allows you to create something similar like you could with scoped assignments in MDX. It allows you to not only create business logic in form of a simple measure, but it actually can define calculation rules which can be applied in combination to a measure. So I will show you an example of this later on. Composite models is another exciting feature, and here we are in the area which is Power BI only and not available in Analysis Services standalone. Composite models allows you to combine data out of different data sources. So first thought would be, but that is something which Power BI is all about. So if we're working in the import mode, for sure we can combine data from different data sources and so on. That is true, but you weren't able to do this when you are working with the direct query mode. In the beginning in Power BI, if you had a direct query data source like a SQL Server, for example, you weren't allowed to add data content from another data source, neither direct query nor import. And the composite models were the first step to actually allow you to change this. They allow you to combine data from different data sources and to decide individually on table level about the storage mode of this data, if this should be direct query or import. And the newest feature available in preview since December 2020 is the possibility to also enable direct query mode for analytical models like Power BI datasets. And that is a real game changer in the whole modeling part of Power BI, because that actually allows you to create enterprise models, certified Power BI data sets with proven technology and proven logic, and allow your specific key users who need to enhance this with their own logic, for example, with an Excel file containing a specific clustering or a specific subset of data that cannot be included into the data warehouse so easily, to actually create their own data model based on this certified, this proven and IT department checked data model to actually include all the logic that is already therein and to combine this with their own data. And that is a real game changing. I was already talking about storage mode. The other cool feature that's actually something which needed to be implemented to enable the composite models is the many-to-many relationships. And that is also something which is really new, because that is something which even analysis services, multidimensional in the old world, this really amazing tool I loved working with, wasn't able to do. You now have the possibility to really create full working many-to-many relationships between two tables. You don't need any kind of bridge tables or intermediary fact tables or something like this, like you needed before. You can actually define many-to-many relationships between different tables with all the advantages and disadvantages. And the last thing I would like to talk about is also something which came up as a follow-up to the composite models and something which you already know from multidimensional. This is the term of aggregations. And aggregations also opens up a full variety of different possibilities where to set this up and how to use this. And this also changes the use cases where Power BI datasets or Power BI data models are actually useful, because this allows you to really create data sets on top of huge amounts of data and to work with this data in a still manageable and performant way. And with this, let's dive into the different demos I prepared just to show you some of the features. Before I dig into there, are there any questions at the moment? Nothing. Okay, I see in the Q&A, Gaguna, that you that we can answer them afterwards, and we still will have the possibility. I see no questions there yet. So let's get started. So the first thing I would like you to show is a very, very simple example of calculation groups. And let me find the correct model. So a very typical example of what you created with MBX, for example, in an analysis services cube in the past, was a time intelligence or time calculation scenario. So if you're thinking about a classical controlling model, what you normally have is different kinds of key figures that you want to work with, like the sales amount, the discounts, product costs, quantity, and so on. And you typically have a very classical set of rules, of calculation rules that you want to apply to each of those measures. And in the past, what you needed to do, for example, if you wanted to create a month to date, year to date, previous year, and so on, to make this work, is you had to create one version of each calculation rule in combination with each key figure. So you would have a sales amount current, sales amount month to date, sales amount previous year, sales amount year to date, discount current, and so on. You can see this is a lot of topics to write. Most of them are very, very similar, because you could more or less copy and paste the formulas and just exchange the key figures those formulas are applying. But if you need to change something, if, for example, for some reason, the logic for your year over year changes, or you have something like a compounded annual growth rate, and somebody thinks of, we now want to calculate it over 3 instead of 2 years, and so on, it really starts getting messy, because you really have to update all those different measures for all the key figures that you actually are using this calculation rule for. And calculation groups is actually the fun fact that allows you to simplify the whole process by setting up groups that actually contain this information about those calculation rules, and you can apply those calculation rules to the different measures. So if we're looking at this table, for example, we have the key figure sales amount, discount, total product costs, and at the moment I selected the key figure year-to-date test. If I switch to current, you see the some of the figures are actually changing. If I split to month to date, you see that 2014 actually changed because we're looking back at 2014. I have the January inside and the February. So if I scroll down, I can see it here. But why was 2014 hiding before? Because in the standard definition, the full year would show the month to date value for December. I don't have December, so if I switch to month to date, I wouldn't. I don't see it for the full year. If I'm looking at previous year, I would expect to see in 2014, for example, the value from 2013, so the 16 millions. So sorry, I remember my previous year was broken. I'm sorry. So if I'm looking at my quarter to date, for example, I would expect in every of the month to see the same figure as in my quarter value, or actually aggregating up to this quarter value. That is actually how it works all the time. So as you can see, by just switching between those different calculation rules, it's actually applying this to each and every of those key figures. And how can I actually set this up? And that is something where Power BI now relates on external tools, so-called external tools, which are actually exposed to your usage in the Power BI desktop tool itself. How to get it there? There is a good documentation of how to do that, but actually, as soon as those tools are installed on your machine, Power BI will actually detect those tools and will offer each of those tools that is installed in this specific browser. And why is it useful to have them here instead of just using them on their own? The tool we want to use for the calculation groups is Tabular Editor. Tabular Editor is an advanced tool to actually create and maintain analysis services tabular models. And if I'm now clicking on this Tabular Editor button here, what it will do is it will open up the Tabular Editor application, and it will automatically connect to the model in my Power BI desktop. So my model is already related. What you can see is I see my tables herein, which I saw before. This is related directly to my Power BI desktop model. And when I perform changes here, those changes can be saved back to my Power BI desktop model. So that is really amazing. And it is really, in my opinion, a very strong move of Microsoft's to actually allow this inclusion of external tools in Power BI desktop, because by this, they can keep the look and feel and the complexity of Power BI desktop to a manageable level like it is right now. It can actually encapsule certain advanced modeling techniques and functionality in those external tools, and they don't have the necessity to create a full-blown tool like, for example, we have with SQL Server data tools before, which gets larger and larger. You get more and more ribbons. It will get more complicated to find your way through it, and more slower, or even slower than it was before, because that is something which we all from IT department perspective experienced with SQL Server data tools. The more you had inside, the slower the tool got. And we have to keep in mind that Power BI Desktop is still also the self-service tool. So advanced modeling might be something which IT department will do, or the real power users, but not everybody is really interested in starting to create calculation groups, for example. So by this, we can limit this down. We can split this up into specific tools that are for specific tasks. But back to the calculation groups. As you can see, the calculation group is called Time Intelligence. Let me now switch to another mode. And you can identify this by this calculator symbol on top of the table. So that is actually marking the calculation groups. You can create a calculation group by just creating a new calculation group. That is something which is allowed here. And you can also configure the calculation group here. And what we can see in the properties is that you have the possibility to actually define the name for your calculation group. This calculation group, for example, is called time intelligence. You can assign a precedence to the calculation group, which is especially interesting when you have different calculation groups that need to be combined. For example, another calculation group for currency calculation, or a calculation group for, I don't know, specific business calculations that you're doing. And sometimes it is important to have control which calculation is done first and which calculation is done last. And this you can already configure on calculation group level by assigning the precedence. Another thing, or the next thing, would actually be to create the calculation items itself. So calculation items is like members inside your calculation group. You really create like rows in a table. This is like a kind of calculated table. This is the column you are actually working in. So it's the column time calculation in your calculated table, time intelligence, and current, month to date, and so on would be rows inside this table. And per row, you can actually set up this calculation rule, which I talked about. So if we are at the quarter to date, for example, you are, and that is the amazing DAX function that makes this possible, you are calculating based on the measure that is currently collected. So this is always performed in the context of your current visual. Based on the selected measure, you can create your quarter to date. And as I'm working at a lot of customers with quite strange fiscal calendars, I started writing all my time calculations as, let's say, individual filters instead of the quarter to date or total quarter to date, total year to date functionality that DAX offers as well. But this would work with the standard time calculation versions as well. And so by this, you are actually defining, if I select the member year-to-date test of the calculation group time intelligence or time calculation, which calculation should be applied to the actual selected measure. And that is all the cool stuff. And here again, you have the possibility to define ordinals, to define the calculation order, how the different members of this calculation group are actually are calculated if you apply several of them. And what is even more useful, and even the next amazing part, is this format string expression. Because if you were dealing with issues like you want to format a certain measure based on the content, that is something which was quite hard in Power BI before calculation groups came up, because you could use the format string function in DAX, but that would actually return your result as a string instead of a number. So you couldn't use the results inside visuals. You only could use this inside tables or matrices. And the format string expression that you can apply to the calculation groups are dynamic format strings, and they are actually applied as the standard format strings that you can assign to a measure as well. So they don't convert the result into a text, but they are really just applying a formatting. And by being dynamic, you can define expressions that are working. But what is even cooler, you can, for example, if you're doing a currency recalculation, you can, for example, set up a currency table like we have in the model, and you could add a column currency format string to each and every currency. And if you're setting up your currency calculation group, you have a member euro, and you would say, for the format string, use the value of the column currency format string for my for my member euro from the currency table. So you have actually the possibility to really have a full control and influence over your formatting as well. So that was a quite long explanation of calculation groups, and I need to hurry on a little bit to show you the other features as well. But this is really amazing because okay, I'm sorry that not everybody can see my screen, but it looks like this this is an individual problem. I'm sorry for that, but I hope it works for all the others. But this is seems to be this is really a game changer in my point of view, because especially with larger models with a lot of calculations and a lot of reoccurring calculations, this can really keep the maintenance, the amount of maintenance work to a manageable level, and that is really amazing. The next thing I would like to show you is a quick demo of the composite models, just to show you how this works. And as I mentioned, in the past, or in December, we had a change of that allows you to actually set up a composite model also including live connections. So former connections to Power BI data sets, for example, or Azure Analysis Services models, which wasn't possible so far. And I will not, or I could show you a quick demo of how to set this up in the first place, but just to get started with what we see here, just make this a little bit bigger. I also switched to the new modeling view, which has the big advantage that you can see with a simple glance that which tables are coming from the same data source. So all the royal blue ones are from one data source, the dark blue ones are from another data source. And if we're looking at the data source settings, you will see that we have two different data sources inside this model. One is actually a direct query to analysis services, and that is the new cool feature. It's not a live connection to a Power BI dataset, but it's a direct query connection to a Power BI dataset. And the other connection, those are the dark blue tables, are to a SQL Server. And I can now treat those tables from different data sources as it would be if they would be tables in the same data source. And if we're looking at the storage mode for those different tables, just open it up. If we're looking at the storage mode for those tables, and I'm wondering why I cannot see this storage mode. Let me look here. I'm sorry, I'm a bit out of my depth, because normally you had a storage mode information inside this, and probably this is changed after I switched to the new view, and I forgot to look into this. Actually, the storage mode is also presented in the table information. So it's showing you here inside the table header how the storage mode of the table actually is. So you can see this one is coming from the analysis services database, the Power BI dataset, and its direct query. But even the storage mode for the SQL Server based tables is in direct query. And this is something which you now can treat as if they were from the same data source, in which you can configure. And by applying this and changing this, you can actually could work up to the next feature, with which is the aggregations. And the third feature, which I mentioned, which is the relationship type. And as I mentioned, you have the possibility to switch between different relationship types and also use the many-to-many. I will keep this demo to the end. I think we don't have the possibility to watch that demo, because I would like to show you aggregations next. But just to mention, you have the possibility to create this many-to-many relationships here. And yeah, maybe one thing to add, if you want to add this kind of new data source, like a Power BI data set, what you would need to do here is to select a data set from your choice, like, for example, something simple like this new data set. And what would happen here is that actually this data set is not possible. There was an error message because I couldn't connect to this data source at the moment. Let me just try another one to quickly show you this. Oh, sorry, that was. Okay, so what you saw here is that we had a quick message showing you that it switched this new feature into there it is. It created a direct query model for this. Normally, if you connect to a Power BI data set, it would be in live connection. Now it set up a direct query mode. And one important thing you need to know is what are the permissions to do this. So if you want to connect to set up a direct query model to a Power BI data set, you need to have at least build permissions on that data set. So that is the one thing. And what is more important, in the tenant you are working, XMLA endpoints have to be activated, at least in read mode, better in read write, but at least in read mode. And when you're setting up this feature in the Power BI tenant, then you can actually configure if this feature is enabled for everybody in your organization or only for a subset of your organization, like specific security groups. And only somebody with access to this XMLA endpoint feature will have the possibility to set up those direct query models on analysis services. Okay, to quickly go to the last demo, the aggregations part. As I mentioned, the aggregations demo is actually based on the composite models because aggregations is something which currently can only be set up for direct query data sources. So what is aggregations actually doing? If you're thinking about a really huge SQL Server data source, for example, you're having an ERP data source with several terabytes of data, and you don't want to upload everything to Power BI, or even if you're thinking about the clicky, draggy, droppy New York taxi demo from Christian Wade with, I don't know, petabytes of data probably, that is something which you actually even cannot upload to the Power BI service because it would even not fit into the large data sets that you can actually set up. Then you can set up your detail fact table in direct query mode, and you can create an aggregation fact table that contains pre-aggregated versions of your key figures in another table. And this aggregation table could also be in direct query mode if that is something which your data source supports and makes it faster, or you could use this in an import mode. And what you can decide is you can decide for this aggregation table which dimensions are related to it. So this, for example, would be pre-aggregated over medallion, but you could also add something like level-based information. So if we're, for example, having a date table on day basis, but this aggregation should contain informations aggregated on month level, you can pre-aggregate this on month level, and then you can tell the engine to treat this like a virtual connection to your date table. And you're doing this by actually choosing this manage aggregations part on your aggregation table. And here what you're doing is you're defining per each column inside your aggregation table how this is treated in comparison to other tables inside the model. So for example, the column count rows in the aggregation table would be treated like a count table rows for the trip table, my detailed fact table. And if we're looking at the month name, this would be treated like a group by column for the month name in my date dimension. And by this, you can activate this. And to quickly show you how to check this, and as a closure up for my demos, then I'm done. You can test this by using another of the external tools available in Power BI Desktop. And this external tool is the so-called DAX Studio, another amazing tool for everything you want to do here. And this DAX Studio allows you to actually check on your queries, on the analysis services, like you could do with a profiler or extended events by applying the server timings button. And this will return to you the information about what happened inside your queries. And we remember that the medallion dimension was, for example, connected to the aggregation fact table. And if I'm now running a query that contains dimensions connected to the aggregation fact table in combination with a key figure that was defined. And if I'm running this query, I will leave the mode for a bit. I'm running the query. The server timings will return a specific information that would tell me if the aggregation table was hit. This is the so-called the subclause rewrite attempted. It tells me it found a match for the aggregation table. And the scan actually now tells you that instead of querying the data out of my detail table, the engine rewrote the query to actually gather the information out of my aggregation table. And this can be done with all the features we just saw. And this is really cool. And this actually allows you to even query large amounts of data, huge amounts of data in direct query mode by setting up the aggregations in a way that your overviews are pretty fast. And when you're looking into details with this, the specific filters, it still is fast. With this, I would like to conclude my presentation. Just to mention in the slides, there is additional information on the external tools and the different modeling techniques I was talking about, and some hints on what will come next. And yeah, with this, thanks for your time. I won't keep any more time from Isabelle and Samudra. And I don't see any questions in the chat, but there is one. That's fine. And with this, yeah, thanks so much. Regula, Isabelle, I don't know if Isabelle wants to start.
Yes, let's just check with the attendees if there are any questions that anyone would like to unmute and ask. If not, you can type in your questions on the chat window, and Gabi would answer them for you. Thank you so much. Yep.
Thanks. I will stay in the meeting until the end. So if there are questions, I'm happy to answer them later on. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gabi. All right, so let's move on to the next session. We have Isabelle Van Campenhoudt from Brussels. So she'll be talking about Power BI and Power Automate better together. Thank you so much, Isabelle, for being with us, and over to you.
Thank you for having me. I hope you can hear me, and that I will share my screen now to start my session as well. So here we go. And so we can start. So this session is about, on one side, Power Automate, and on the other side, Power BI. And the goal is to find out if there is something going on between those two very important parts of the Power Platform at Microsoft. So yes, I will ask you to use your phone if possible, or to use a web page, because I would just ask you one question to help to connect with you people during the session, because we are doing those meetings online for a year now, thanks to COVID. So you just need to go to this QR code or to this website from your phone or from your computer, and you will see a question, a polling coming in a few seconds. So thank you for that. So I will not take a long time just to present myself. So I'm Isabelle Van Campenhoudt, and I'm a data platform MVP since 9 years now. It's about a long time. I'm from Brussels, and I've been working on the Microsoft data platform since 1999, so it's quite a long time. Okay, so now if you take, and I don't know why I have this ugly screen, because usually this is working very well. So if you can just take a few seconds to answer that, and I will go maybe directly to the actual screen. So just to know if you are more about Power BI, more about Power Automate, but because you are already in a Power BI meetup, of course, I guess that most of you are more into the Power BI world. The goal was to see if anyone has already used Power Automate or test Power Automate. Okay, so let's move on to the presentation itself. And first of all, the agenda. So I will do a quick introduction to the Power Automate 101, as we can say. Then we will go through the different interaction that we can find between Power Automate and Power BI. So we will see what about the data set, what about data alert, what about the Power BI REST API, is this a way to exploit it? What about Power Query and Power Automate, and also a quick word about data flow. So when you think about the Power Platform, it's not only about Power BI, of course, but you will find also Power Apps, so which is a low-code development platform, which allows you to create forms. And it is not because it's low-code that you cannot manage to do some very nice and very complex stuff. And usually, Power Apps is working with Power Automate. And Power Automate can work by its own, of course. So this is a flow engine, but you will see that this flow engine is very rich. And the last kit on the block is the Power Virtual Agent that allows you to create a chatbot if you want in your solution. There are some common ground between all of them because they are using data connector. The data connector are not the same in Power BI and in Power Automate. I mean, it's not the same connector technically. So you may find some connector existing in Power BI that are not existing in Power Automate, and the other way around. All of them can take benefits from the machine learning layer. And a very common ground in this case is that they can work with what is now called Dataverse, of the common data service. In the case of Power BI, it is more the analytics version, of course, that is involved. We will talk a little about that at the end of the session with data flow. Okay, so as you can see, and this slide is not up to date because I'm a lazy person and I'm not updating my slide each month. But there are hundreds, literally hundreds and hundreds of connectors that are available into Power Automate. So meaning that you can easily reach any system, systems that are online or systems that are also on premises, because we can use the data gateway the same way we are using it in Power BI. Okay, and we can also create very, very easily custom connector. So that's a difference with the Power BI custom connector. If you manage to create one, you know that it takes some development into management studio with the special development kit and so on and so on. In this session, I will show you to really quickly create a custom connector in Power Automate. So in Power Automate, it was called before Microsoft Flow, so they changed the name to Power Automate, but still it's flows. So you will find 5 types of flow. You have the schedule flow, so you start a process on a specific planning, a specific schedule. You can have automated flow that will be triggered by event. Something happens, up, the flow is triggered. You will have instant flow that are flow that you can call by making an action, like literally pushing a button on your phone, or a physical button exists that can interact with flow. You have the business process flow that is more for the dynamic situation when you are creating a complex business process, and flow is involved into that. And the last but not least is the UI flow. So those are more the RPA parts. So that means that now Power Automate is able to register the action that you are doing in a user interface for a legacy program, and to interpret that into a flow. So that allows you to create very, very nice scenario with legacy system, because you have the whole robotic aspect in it. Okay, if we have a look at, this is, and I think I have seen that Gabi has put that link into his her slides. This is the famous Power BI end-to-end schema from Melissa Coates, and you can see that this is very rich. So where is Power Automate in this schema? Actually, it's there. So in this little corner here, we can find all the elements of the Power Platform that we can use from the Power BI service. So let's start into the concrete aspects of it. Power Automate and Power BI dataset. So the idea is to see what are the interaction that you can have with dataset in Power BI when you want to use Power Automate. So in Power Automate, like we have seen before, you can connect to a tremendous amount of different sources and data sources. The difference, of course, with Power BI is that in Power Automate, you are able to write data as well. So it's a bi-directional arrow that we can put between that. And if you are using data on premises, this will require Power Automate premium license. So the premium license, I have added some slide at the end, and we will share the slide with you, of course. Premium license on Power Automate are not the same and not as expensive as in Power BI, just saying. Okay. So a very, very straightforward scenario, but that's not amazing at all, of course, is that Power BI, as Power Automate, can work with the same data source, but there is no real connection between Power Automate and Power BI. A more interesting way to work for some scenario is the fact that one of the features that you will find in Power Automate is the ability to write directly into a data set. But to do so, you will need a very specific kind of data set. You will need a streaming data set. The scenario that we can envision for that, for instance, is that you can use Power Automate to create a whole process that will populate your data set, and then you will have a dashboard that will show that in a very vivid way, because it will be real time, of course. So that's a very specific use case. Another scenario that can be very interesting as well is the fact that you can trigger the refresh of a data set from Power Automate. And this is interesting if you need to do that to respond to some event, because otherwise you already have a scheduling feature into Power BI, or you can also use a PowerShell to do some stuff. So there are other tools to do that. But within Power Automate, of course, what it is interesting is the fact that you can use complex flow to respond to some event, to some apparition of data, and to refresh your data set. There is no magical bullet here, because you won't be, you will be able only to refresh in the limitation that you had on your Power BI license. So it's not because you can refresh the data set from Power Automate that you can say, oh, very nice, I will do that every minute. No, you will be limited by your license as usual. So there are no there are no possibility to do a workaround there. The license model is very strong, actually. So if we talk about on-premises data, of course, the data gateway come into mind. And this slide is just to illustrate that the data gateway is not only usable by Power BI or by your data flow if you are using data flow here, but you can use it also with Power Automate, but also with Power Apps, with the data flow from the Power Platform. So another kind of data flow, very similar, but another kind. And also Azure Logic Apps. So Azure Logic Apps is, I don't know what to say. It's the layer behind Power Automate. So Power Automate is low code, is graphical. Azure Logic Apps is more a developer environment, and you can do stuff in Azure Logic App that you can't do in Power Automate. But on the other way around, there are some stuff that you can easily do in Power Automate that are really tricky to achieve in Azure Logic App. So that's another story, of course. And you can also use your data gateway for Azure Analysis Service if you want. The principle is the same. The only difference, as I mentioned before, is that Power Automate is able to write data into the data source, and Power BI will only read data because it is an analytic tool, of course. A very interesting feature that appears not that long ago, and actually it's still in preview, it's the fact that you can use Power Automate to export data from Power BI. Let's have a look to that. And one of the most wanted scenario is the usage. It's the fact that you can create subscription, and that you can even create data-driven subscription. I don't know if you are familiar with SSRS from the past, maybe, or because you are still on premises as well. So SQL Server reporting service. In the SQL Server reporting service, it is really easy to manage what we call the data-driven subscription. So the fact that we can say, okay, we want this report to be sent to this list of people, but each of them needs to have different filters that we call parameters in that case, or different formats, and so on and so on. So no, with the action export to file, you will be able to do that in Power Automate. So Power Automate actually will export the file from the Power BI reports. And once the file is created, it's easy in Power Automate to create an action that will send the email to the people that you want, or to send it to a specific location if you want as well. So that's a very nice scenario, but of course, it will require premium, and premium in Power BI, and a real premium. So if you are using premium per user, that is not enough because it requires some specific type of capacity in the workspace to work. So I will show you that later in the demo, how it works. Another interesting built-in feature into Power Automate, an action that you will find, is the data alert. So in this case, we will work the other way around from Power BI to Power Automate. So maybe you are familiar with data alert. When you are creating a dashboard in Power BI, you can define on the tiles a data alert. And when a certain amount, for instance, is reached, you will receive a notification in the Power BI system, or you can receive an email as well with the alert. In this case, what is possible is that we can trigger a flow in Power Automate from the data alert in Power BI. So in that case, the scenario, and I will show you that, will be that, of course, you need to respond to this event and not only by an email. Another action that you can find between Power Automate and Power BI is an action called Power Query. And of course, you are like, oh, that's really nice. I can use Power Query in Power Automate. This feature is in preview since, I don't know if it's 2 or 3 years. So let's not get excited about it, and I will explain why. So in Power Automate, you can use an action called Power Query to connect to a SQL Azure database. So that's the only source that you can use with the Power Query action, which is very limited, of course. And this action will allow you only to create one result. So you can't create different queries, and there are some limitations on it. And to be totally honest with that, I don't know if you already have tried it, but the problem is that this action is not evolving at all. And I've been told that the guy who was developing it is not there anymore. And actually, they don't care. So why am I talking about it? Just to make a big question mark, a bit warning. I'm not sure this is the good way to do Power Query with Power Automate. And why they are not developing that? Is it because now in the Power Platform, we have data flows. And so you will have the Power Query on that part. So the architecture is a little different. So now that I have listed different kind of stuff, I will propose you to have a first demo, so to see some of them. Okay, let's start with, for instance, I will just show you the home screen of Power Automate for the people that are not familiar with it. So to go there, you need to type flow.microsoft.com, then to sign in, and you can activate a trial. It's like Power BI if you want to test it. What is it important is that, of course, you will create your flow here. And when you create a flow, okay, when you create a flow, you can create a flow from a template, and there are hundreds of them. On you can create your own flow from a blank Canva if you want. The first flow I will show you here is the data alert. So I have here a very old dashboard with a very old look. And this dashboard, it's about fictional expenses for travel in a company. And you have the total of expenses here. So of course, when you go to the three little dots here, you can go to manage alerts. And you see that there is an alert that is defined here. Okay. So by default, you will receive a notification, something like that, notification. Or you can say, okay, send me an email too, which is not very handy, because if you want to do something that is corporate, it's on the user itself basis. And then you have this tiny little sentence here, this link. And if you click on it, it will propose you to directly create a flow here. Okay. I just changed my password a few days ago, so I have some connection that needs to be refreshed. And this is the trigger. So this is typically the way you start a flow. So this is a trigger. And you see that is connected to the Power BI with my account and is giving me the list of the existing alert. Once this is done, I will be able to create new steps, and for those steps, I will have action. So you start with a trigger, and then you have all the action. And in all the action, there is a lot of different stuff that you can ask for. For instance, you want to you think, okay, I want to send an email or something like that. You see that I have already different kind of email available. And if I choose, for instance, Outlook, then I have a lot of action that are available with the Outlook stuff. And so you can start to build something. Okay. Let's move to the other flow I was talking about, which is the flow. I will just try to be on the right. Yes, this one. Oh, okay, perfect. So in this flow that I have called Power BI subscription, I will edit it and show you a different action. So this flow is defined by a button. It's just because I wanted to keep it very simple. So it can be a schedule one. Usually it will be a schedule one for this use case. I manually trigger a flow. You can add some question here that you can retrieve later on, but in that case, I didn't do that. Then I have choose the action export to file for Power BI report. So when you add an action, I will tell him, okay, what are the actions for Power BI? And then I receive the list of the action with Power BI. And you see that is very, very small list here. So I can export to file for Power BI report. If you are using paginated report as well, and it makes sense because those two options are available for premium capacity workspaces, you can also use an action for that. Okay, and you see this is the action to refresh the data set, and it is the action to add rows to a data set. And all of those actions are still in preview mode. I don't know why they never put it like a definitive action, because those ones are existing for years, but okay, they are working, so no worries about that. So let's go to this action. And in this box, you see that there are quite a lot of details that you can give. So you will, of course, connect to your tenants, and then you will find the report, the workspace you want to work with that needs to be premium. Then you will find the report you want to export. You have the choice of the format, like here. And then there are a lot of parameters. I didn't use them. here for the demo, but they are very interesting because, of course, you can provide a locale to apply. You can choose to include or not the hidden page. You can use some bookmark as well. You can use filters, and you can specify for the different pages what you want to see as well. So you can walk page by page. And what it is interesting is that you can also work with identities to be sure that the role level situation will be nice. And of course, what I have done is just, okay, take that report, export it to PDF, and then send it by email, and it works. But of course, the very interesting scenario here is to use a loop for each and to read data from a table when you put, okay, for Mr. Smith, I want to have a PDF with those filter and these identities. And for Mrs. Johnson, I want to have a PowerPoint because she's from marketing and she prefers to have a PowerPoint, and so on and so on. So when it's done, you can send an email. And if I go to the advanced option, you see here, and here is the power of Power Automate. It is the dynamic contents. Every time you are creating action in your process, you will retrieve dynamic properties, and those properties can be used later on in your flow. So when I was mentioning the use case of data-driven subscription, of course, the flow will be I have a schedule, then I will read a table on a data source or a SharePoint list of whatever, a CSV file if you want, not easy to maintain, or an Excel. Then for each of the rows on this table, I will do my export, and I will use the property that I can find from my table to populate the different parameters I need to export my report. So when it's done, when your flow is created, of course, if your flow is triggered by an event or is scheduled, you need to wait, but no, you can test it as well if you want, and you just need to run the flow here. So it's just for testing purpose, of course, and I will send it, and it's done. It will take some time, so maybe I can only just show you the result of it. So one moment. I am opening the email, and you see here, please find your daily monitoring report. And here I have the PDF, and I already have opened the PDF as well here. And you see that I have received my report here. So it works, and it is, I have a lot of customers who are asking for this scenario. Okay. Now I have shown you the action that we have, and you have seen that that's not much. We have the export to file, we have the refresh dataset, we have the data alert trigger, and we have the write into a streaming dataset. That's not enough, because Power Automate is a very nice tool, and we want to go deep with that. We want to use it to automate some stuff in the administration of our tenant. So, of course, the following idea would be, can I call the Power BI REST API from Power Automate? Is that possible? And the answer is yes, you can do that. There is no built-in connector to do that, but I will show you how to create one. So the idea is the following. I have Power Automate, and I recreate a custom connector to the Power BI REST API. So I will be able to retrieve all the methods from that and then to use them into my flow, and sky will be the limit. Isn't that marvelous? Okay. So I'm a very lazy person. And that's why I'm working in IT, to be honest. So I was like, okay, no, I need to create a custom connector. I've done that in Power BI and it's quite exhausting, to be honest. And I was a little afraid, but I found that other people were doing it. I've put the link into my my slide as well. And then the method to do that is not difficult. So when you are here in the flow environment, you will see the template. So all the pre-built, and there are a lot of them. So if you need to start something, I advise you to go there first to do your, it's like a marketplace. Then you have the list of connector, and of course you are, okay, I want to create a connector, and we go there. No, it's not there. It's not happening there. You need to go to data, which is a little odd, but okay. And then you will find custom connectors. So to create a new custom connector, what do you need to do? You can create it from blank, which is exhausting, of course, but you can also create it from an Azure service. You can creating it by importing an open API file. And I was like, that sounds nice, because I know that on GitHub, I have the Swagger file, which is a JSON file with the description of the Power BI REST API. So let's see if this is something possible. I think that this is on my download. Swagger good here. Okay. Continue. And you see here Swagger editor that will allow you to modify the file if you want. But you see that it is already working. So what we see here, if you are familiar with the Power BI REST API, is that you have the different methods here with the description. So all is there, the gateways method, the imports, the workspace, and so on and so on. So it smells really good. Of course, this is not the only step that you will need to do, because you will need to define the security. And by that, I mean that you will need, and I will edit this one, that you will need to authorize, for automate, you will need to authorize your connector in the Azure Active Directory to interact with your Power BI REST API. I think I've made a slide about that. So first step, you use the Power BI REST API Swagger file, and you will retrieve the action. Yep. No, I didn't put it there. Sorry, but there is a link for that. So you will need to register the application in Azure, so you will be able to use it. Does it work? It works. So I will show you here another flow, which is a flow to create a workspace. So I will edit this one. And of course, you can use this custom connector to do what you usually do with the REST API. So you can use it to monitor your environment and to add stuff into a specific repository to have an historical view of what's going on in your tenant, but you can also use it to do some action in your tenant. Like here, for instance, to create a new workspace. Again, this is a very simple example, but what the ideal scenario would be, okay, I have a form in Power Apps, for instance, where people will ask for a workspace, and then I will use those information to create my workspace. So let's have a look at this custom connector. So if I go here, I have all of my action. Check the connectivity status, for instance. Delete the specified data set from the specified workspace. So you can think about a kind of very strong police that can clean up your workspace and delete specified workspace and so on and so on and so on. Okay, so in that case, what I have done is just to create a new workspace, and it's pretty simple. So when I use this one, I will run it. Here, I will give a name. Let's call this workspace Tuesday. Sorry, my imagination is a little low today. Run flow. And now the flow is running. And when the flow is running, you can always have a look at it. You see? And for the debug, this is really interesting because it will give you all the stuff that he has done for that. So now if I go back to my tenant, my Power BI tenant, I will go to my workspace list and I will see Tuesday. The workspace is created. And of course, I could put more and more stuff into that. Once the workspace is created, I can add the security, I can do all the stuff into the Power Automate flow and manage that in a very convenient way for administrative purpose. Okay, let's go back to our slide. So when your customer connector is created, you can use it in Power Automate. And yes, this screenshot is more about to return the refresh history. That's also something that you can do, of course. The demo is done. And here there is a link to the Swagger file, which is usually updated. So you will retrieve more methods, of course, than the one I am using in my connector. Okay, and now the last part of this presentation is Power Automate and data flow. Like I mentioned before, you are probably aware of the existence of data flows in Power BI. So data flows allow you to do ETL online. You will do your Power Query on the service itself and prepare entities that can be used later on your data set. In the Power Automate and Power Apps world, you also have data flows. And the way it will work, yeah, this slide is a little messy, but we will have a look at it. So Power Automate, Power Apps, Power BI, they can all use Power Query online with data flow to create entities. The thing that will be different is the storage, where they will put the results of the data flows. So in the data flow for Power Platform, you will use Dataverse by default because your data are operational data. But you can specify when you create a data flow that it is a data flow for analytics. And if you are using data flow in Power BI, it is straight to the lake, if I may say. What do we have in Power Automate for that? So what I can show you is that as an action, as an action. I think it's this one. Pum pum pum. Is it this one? No, of course not. Yes, it's this one. Sorry. You have an action that is called refresh a data flow. So you can choose when you want to refresh a data flow, if it is a data flow from a workspace, meaning a data flow from Power BI, or if it is a data flow from an environment. Alors, environment, what it is, when you are developing into the Power Platform, you have what we call environment. So here, for instance, I am on my demo environment, but I can also go to my personal productivity. So there are different zones where you can create your solution. And a solution in Power Platform is a bundle of Power Apps and flows all together to create something. Okay, so the data flow, they are here. If you go to data and you want to create data flow, it happens there. Bum, bum, bum. Sorry, I was not on the right place. New data flow, blank. And then here you are. Is it analytical or not? And then you will be. But that's a very specific kind of data flow that are meant to be used by Power Apps and by Power Automate as a repository for your Power Apps. Okay. So the action itself here was that I am able from Power BI to also refresh my data flow. And if I do that, and I think my data flow are situated here, you will need to know the grid of your workspace, but also the one from your data flow. And then in Power Automate, you will be able to do this refresh. Well, what I think it was here. Okay. Okay. You can know. My bad. Actually, you can use the friendly name, which is better, of course. Okay. As you can see, 2 hours ago, I was testing it, it was succeeded, but actually it didn't succeed. So you need to be aware of that and to be sure that your data flow is really working. I have no idea about the time, but it's time for the conclusion, at least. So if I want to summarize all the action and interaction that we have into Power Automate and Power BI, that can be a very happy marriage between them. So we can have, of course, Power BI and Power Automate working on the same data source. Power Automate is able to write data into streaming data set, and Power BI is able to trigger Power Automate via the data alerts. There is a function to do some Power Query, but because of data flow, I guess, this function is only limited to Azure and is in preview for years now. It's working though. You can refresh your data set within Power Automate, which is interesting if you want to respond to some event, but you are still limited to the number of refresh that you are allowed by your license. Also, Dataverse is in the picture, so the common data service are there, and you can use data flow in Power Automate, and you can refresh from Power Automate the data flow that are existing in your Power BI environment. What I didn't put in this slide is the fact that this is so a few actions that are built into the Power Automate. But if you want to go deeper, on that, you will need to use a custom connector on the REST API. And from that, you will be able to do a lot of stuff to manage your tenant, to do monitoring, to do administration stuff. And that's the most interesting part, in my opinion. One of the most interesting. Also, I forgot here to mention the export to file, which is also a really nice scenario. Unfortunately, it is limited to the premium workspace, so you need a capacity to be able to do that. So this is some summary of that, and that's all for today. So if you have questions, I will be delighted to have it. And I thank you for your attention. You can also reach me easily on Twitter if you want. That's not a problem. I will be happy to answer you on LinkedIn. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Isabelle. So this was a great session. Hope you guys enjoyed it. So let's now move on to the final session in the last 15 minutes. Samudra will take you through analyzing Parquet files using Power BI Desktop. If you have any questions for Isabelle or for Gabi, please put them down in the chat box and they will answer them for you. So since we have the last few minutes, let's have Samudra take over. Over to you, Samudra.
Okay, hope you all can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Let me share my. Hi everyone. Since you all have gone through 2 sessions, let me quickly run through my session today. I just want to explain this feature, small feature which Power BI has released recently in February 2021. Favorite feature, analyzing Parquet files using Power BI Desktop. Okay. Let me introduce myself. I am Samudra and I am working as a consultant BI and Analytics. And here I have mentioned my Twitter, LinkedIn and my blog. Usually we all know that Power BI releases updates monthly. And here you can see on my screen some of the features which Power BI released in 2021 February update. So I picked one of those features which comes under data connectivity, Parquet files connector. For those who don't know about the Parquet file, just let me describe the Parquet file briefly. What is the Parquet file and what is the importance of it? So you will understand why we need this feature in Power BI. Okay. Usually we are familiar with CSV files and also Power BI already has a CSV file connector, and actually we know what we can do using CSV files. But actually when it comes to fast data processing for complex data and working with data lakes, Parquet file plays a huge role. So let's see actually how data is stored in CSV. Here on the top you can see a data schema for a people data set, and here you can see column names and data types like ID, first name, last name, likewise. And below it shows how data is stored in CSV file. Actually it's stored line by line, so you can, like, it's a reader friendly way. And let's see how stored data in Parquet file. So here it's here you can see like values for each table columns are stored next to each other rather than those of each records. So here, like you can see, if this data set, if assume that there are 5 ID values, the ID in columnar format, like in Parquet files, it shows 1, 2, 3, like in columnar manner. So assume that if you want to get number of people who lives in blocks using Parquet file, so in that case, actually, file has to go through only last name, then we can get the file count easily. So hope you can got an idea about columnar and row format, data storage formats, and CSV and the Parquet file formats. So here actually let me describe what is the Parquet file. As I explained earlier, it's designed as a columnar storage format, and it's designed to support fast data processing for complex data. Actually, in Parquet files, metadata has metadata including like it's a schema, and structure is embedded within each file. So it's clear that Parquet files plays an important role in system performance when working with data lakes. So let's take a closer look at what Parquet files actually is and why it's matter for big data storage and analytics. So here in this slide, I am explaining importance of Parquet files over CSV. As you like, actually, I got this image from below link. And here it's mentioning immersion S3 bucket. So here the CSV file, it's 1 TB, and if we are going with Apache Parquet format, we can use 130 GB, and actually we are saving 87% less with Parquet. And when it comes to the query run time, actually in this scenario, we are 34 times faster than CSV files. And it happens because in Parquet files, in those columns, it has same data type, so it's very easy to compress all those data, and actually it's an advantage for data engineers and when it comes to the big data. And when it consider the data scan, here you can see 99% less data scan, and actually when it comes to the cost, it shows 99.7. We are saving money. And actually let's move on to the demonstration. And actually I'm doing a small simple demo. In this demonstration, I will show how we can connect the Parquet file and how we can analyze data using Power BI. So in this scenario, I have uploaded 5 sales data Parquet files to Azure Data Lake, and here you can see using the Microsoft Azure Storage Explorer. And let's go to the Power BI desktop, and here we can select get data, and it will load the window. So here, okay, here you can see Parquet data connector here. Otherwise, if you can type the Parquet here, and actually it comes under the file group. So here also you can see the Parquet connector. So I'm going to connect those files which is in the Azure Data Lake to the Power BI. So I'm clicking I click the connect button, and I have to give the URL, and here is the URL, and here it asking the account key, and I have saved the account separately. So I am putting my account key here, and we can connect that data set into the Power BI desktop. Actually, previous this feature was not in the Power BI desktop, and in Power BI 2021 February, they provided this feature. So I'm going to load this data. If we want, we can transform data as well. So after loading the data, in my previous slide, actually I mentioned that the Parquet files are schema based file system. So in that case, here this is the actually here. So in this time, like if we are connect the correct file, you can see the all the data types here. So that is the small demo which I have prepared for this session. And back to the presentation. Here I have mentioned actually some references. So if anyone interested, please go through and like you can get an idea about what is the Parquet file and how we can connect the Parquet files through the Power BI to the Power BI, and you can get an better understanding about the Parquet files and the connector. So that's it from my session, and hope you all understand why we need this connector and how this feature is going to make our life easy and save time and the money. So actually that's it from my session. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Samudra. And with that, we come to the end. If there are any questions, you could quickly type them in, or you can even unmute and ask. Isabelle has left, but Gabi and Samudra are there. Yes, Chaitu has a question. Can you share the recording? Yes, we will share the recording because, on our YouTube channel. It will take a couple of days, probably over the weekend. I would have the recording there. You can also put the link on the chat. So if there are no more questions, thank you so much once again to Gabi and to Samudra and of course Isabelle. It's been great having you over. It's been great having you for the meetup. Okay, there is a question of Hiran. If someone can take that. So Hiran asks, is there any way or tool to convert CSVs to Parquet? I'm not quite sure though. Okay, there's a question. Okay, this can be answered in that one.
Yeah, I think in Power BI Desktop you will not be able to do, but Power BI data flows might be an option, or actually even Power Platform data flows. But Azure Synapse Analytics or Azure Data Factory might be the tools of choice for this actually, and yeah, that might be interesting.
Yep. So Hiran, hope that answered your question. All right, then thank you so much, and
cool.
Thank you everyone. Let's see you again.
Great pleasure being there, and it was a great pleasure seeing Samudra present again.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gabi, for joining for this session. And actually, he was my mentor at New Data Stars of Data. Thank you very much. Actually, I learned a lot of things from you at that time, Gabi.
I think I hadn't to do much. You were on a pretty good way already, so it's a great pleasure to see you here again, and it's a great and thanks again, Gokula. It's really great that you're providing all that invest and engagement to make this possible.
Yep, you're welcome. Thank you so much. Right then. See you all next month. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Have a great time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.